Hello BookTube, it's Roz and I'm here for a Scallydandle because that's awful, how kind of pretentious, because I am talking about a book from Laos. And yeah, Scallydandles are when I kind of go off to different parts of the world and read authors from different places, I suppose. And the book I'm going to talk about is Mother's Beloved by Outhine Bounyavong, and it's a book of short stories. Now, back at the very beginning of the year, I made a video about how I like to scallydandle around with my reading, and I talked about the countries from which I haven't yet read a book, an author by an author from that place, and said, oh, if anyone's got any bright ideas for any of these countries, let me know. And wonderfully, Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot said that he'd heard of a book of short stories from Laos, and why didn't we both get hold of it and read it together, which we did. So thank you, Scott. That's how I came to read this one. Now, I was trying to start these Scallydandle videos with kind of placing the place in our heads a bit in geographically and in time. Now I've got to try and make sure the light's not shining on this too hard. Okay, my prop. Here we have the Indo-Chinese peninsula. So if you see, like above it, you've got China, India to one side. Below, you come down to where Australia is, you've got Indonesia in between and so on. Okay, so on the Indo-Chinese peninsula, you've got Thailand and you've got Vietnam, and kind of between the two is Laos, and it's kind of a strip of a country that is completely landlocked, quite mountainous. It's got Cambodia below it, China and Burma or Myanmar above it. So yeah, got it? Put that down. Now, Laos is a really fascinating country because like all those countries, I suppose, in Indochina, over the centuries, they've kind of risen and fallen in importance, or which was dominant and controlled each other. The countries that there are now are not necessarily the ones that always were. I'm not explaining that very well, but I think you know what I mean. So in the 14th to the 18th century, the Laos was kind of the area that's now Laos was I suppose part of a kingdom called Langzang, that was at that point probably one of the most powerful kingdoms in the Indo-Chinese peninsula, but then things shifted and it kind of basically split up and fell under the control of what was then Siam, now Thailand. Then the French come along and took control of various bits of Indochina, created French Indochina. So from 1893 to 1953, Laos was sort of, sucked into French Indochina along with Vietnam and Cambodia and so on. And it finally got independence, bit of a handover period, but then in 1953, and at that point there was a sort of a supposedly a kind of constitutional monarchy established, and so but basically the country fell into civil war. It was a very poor, undeveloped country at that point. Whilst it had the most incredibly rich artistic, cultural, and so on history, it had become a real backwater. France kind of didn't do much with it, if you know what I mean, and didn't even exploit it that hard, I guess is the truth. So you've got this poor country, this sort of imposed new form of government, but also a kind of communist set of guerrillas, fighting to try and take control. So basically, a civil war between the royalists and the communists, and that what happened to poor old Laos was, I think you usually in these videos I'm often talking about the sort of how the sort of traditional colonialist imperial powers sort of screwed up a country. But in this case, it's one of the places where it was the Soviet Union and the USA. Basically, sometimes they kind of played out their rivalry and their sort of, in effect, imperial ambitions in a different way, but kind of fighting each other by proxy and by supporting different sides in country civil wars, say. So that's what happened to Laos. And you know, because Vietnam, the Vietnamese War was happening kind of in Vietnam alongside them, and the you know, they became like a supply route, parts of Laos, for the North Vietnam regime. Basically, they were carpet bombed by the Americans at that point, and yeah, I think sort of between 1964, I've written this down here because it's such a shocking figure. Between 1964 and 1973, 2 million tons of bombs were dropped on the country of Laos, which is not a big country. At that point, its population was around 2 million. So basically, there was a ton of bombs dropped on the country for every person. You know, it's unthinkable, isn't it? And you know, a lot of it is still there, and that comes out in some of these stories. It's now, I think, got about 7 million people, so it's still quite a small place. Anyway, 1975, the Pathet Lao, or the communist side in the civil war, won, and Laos is actually one of the few remaining officially communist states in the world. Yeah, and when you read and understand about the kind of how the royalist government was a kind of a byword for kind of corruption and like inequalities of wealth and extreme poverty in some areas, and a tiny kind of wealthy elite, yeah, you can see why this was the outcome for Laos, as it were. 21st century, Laos is becoming more open to the outside world. It's really pursuing tourism and industry. It's somewhere I would absolutely love to go and visit. But what about its literary traditions? Because let's get to the book. So Laos had very strong literary tradition, but that literary tradition was closely tied to the Buddhist religion and Buddhist temples. So stories of the life of the Buddha, you know, epic poetry, all with a kind of religious bent, as it were. And then under the French, small elite were sort of introduced to French literature, but literacy across the country was very, very low indeed. Then in the sort of period of the Civil War, both the royalist side and the communist side, people were writing and using literature for political ends to some extent, I suppose. Particularly, you know, the communists, they used that kind of epic poetry to write sort of glorious stories of the revolution instead of glorious stories of the life of Buddha, so I understand. Don't know if any of those is possible to get hold or read of any of those, certainly not in English. Now, Outhine Bounyavong, and I have to say his whole name because I'm not sure which of these is his surname, if you know what I mean. I think actually Outhine might be his surname. He was born in 1942, so he lived through, and he died in 2000, so he lived through all those dramatic events of the second half of the 20th century for Laos. And he came from a rural area or mountain area, but came to the capital, Vientiane, but he had to leave school nevertheless relatively early because of poverty. He did a variety of jobs, but really took to writing and started to write, you know, magazine articles and short stories, despite not having been educated to a high level, as it were. And then when the communists came to control the whole country, and became the government in 1975, he adapted to that, and he went to work for the State Publishing House and then for the Ministry of Information and Culture, and wrote stories that were more, were in tune with what a one-party state of strong ideology expected in order for people to be able to write and be published. So he's had to play it both ways over his career, and that is very much reflected in the stories in this book. Now, this collection was stories that he wrote over quite, across his whole career, really, I think, and but they were put together in 1990, and then in 1999, this English translation was made, and it is the first translation of a book of short stories by a contemporary Laotian author. So there is zero choice of reading things in English from Laos, really, at the moment, and it was produced by a university press in the States. Now, what was good about this book? What's one charming thing for me about this book is that it's dual language. Now, and I presume this is so that people who are learning English, or English-speaking people who are learning Lao can use the dual language to learn and practice. But as a reader, there's just something, obviously this means nothing to me, but there's something kind of slightly fascinating about seeing it. And one of the things that really interests me is, like, look at the equivalent. It's like it's a much more concise language or script, isn't it? Which is interesting. If you know a bit about that, do comment, because I'd like to know more if that's true. So that was a good thing. Another good thing about the book is it's got a really good introduction, and I was so grateful for that, because otherwise, I knew relatively little about Laos and about Laotian, literature, or about Outhine Bounyavong, and the introduction really helped. And in fact, a load of the stuff that I just told you came from that, really. And you did need that context, because both Scott and I, in reading this, were often quite bemused reading these stories, if we're honest. The style is very simple. It's a very kind of sparse, straightforward, almost like sometimes, like something you might tell to a child, or something that's almost like just a factual description of something. Very, very simple style. But, and when you read something like that and it's in translation, you think, is this the original, or is it somehow the way it's been translated? But I think that is genuinely Outhine Bounyavong's style. He writes that way, he chooses to write that way, but that very, very often these stories have a double meaning. Very often they are a parable or an allegory of some sort. They are commenting on a political situation, and there are some of the stories that are commenting on the kind of the corruption of the royalist government in the 1960s, early 70s. There are some that are in a way, well, actually the post sort of communist era ones, they're more sort of like parables for how we can all contribute to the our community and common good in the new Laotian society, as it were. There was one story that reading it just came over as positively surreal, really. It was about two brothers and their dogs, and how the dogs fought and the brothers bickered, and you're thinking, like, what on earth is this? What is the intention here? And then I went back to the introduction and realised that was a story that was written in 1974. So basically, at the close to the end of what had been, however many years of civil war, and then you realise, oh God, obviously this is a story about civil war, but expressed through fighting dogs and brothers. Yeah, he's, I think, got quite strong environmental concerns, and that comes over in some of the stories, you know, in quite a lovely way. Actually, there are some lovely stories in this book that I really, you know, there's a very moving story about the Plain of the Jars, like where lots of these unexploded bombs are, and how yeah, people are still regularly being crippled by, you know, although they're clearing them now. He writes stories that I suppose are showing the value of traditional Laotian values, and that they shouldn't be lost as the country modernises. So they're purposeful stories, but you have to kind of stop and think to get that. It would really have helped me with this book if there'd been, if the stories had been in chronological order, which they're not. So that you kind of knew what period they were written in, if they had a date of their original publication in a magazine or whatever. That would have been really helpful. Yeah, a little bit of context for each story would have helped me arrive at that other meaning that I think they often had. And sometimes I have to say the other meaning passed me by and I was just left bemused. Another thing that was lovely about the book, though, is that I felt I really picked up quite a bit about the physical environment of Laos. You know, sometimes the way things are described, the metaphors that are used are really different from what you would use in your culture. So he would talk about a track being wide enough for an ox cart as a way of kind of giving you a sense of you know, how big it was. You know, I you know, I love that. That gives me great pleasure, I suppose, when you the way someone writes and the way they describe things gives you a picture of a world that's unfamiliar to you. So I would describe this as a very enriching book to read. Yeah, enriching, almost educational, but that sounds, you know, not as dry as educational sounds. But it wasn't always enjoyable. Perhaps, you know, in that if you feel like you're missing something, that's quite frustrating, I think, as a reader. And so, you know, a stronger commentary would have helped. But this is definitely a book that will linger in my mind for a long time. And bearing in mind that short stories are not really my thing, you know, that's praise. But I wouldn't say, oh, you know, grab this book and you'll love it. You'll have loads of fun reading it. It's was yes, I say, an interesting experience rather than a fun one. Although what was fun was sharing it with Scott.